Oh, it's good to hear somebody's voice besides my own when we're singing, and even if Ashley or David or somebody's up here leading, I still hear myself so loud, and I know they have to suffer through hearing me too. When we were in here, just 3 or 4 of us, it is so good to hear a multitude of voices. And I'm sorry for all of those of you still in your cars. You're still only hearing the voice of the song leader, probably still not hearing everybody. I need to get some microphones down so everybody can hear some other voices too. But it is good to see a good number inside today, and I know there are several still outside in the parking lot as well, and we're glad that you're all here, whichever place you are. Since it's Valentine's Day, I thought we should perhaps talk about our Valentine. And Ashley talked a good deal during the Lord's Supper about Jesus' love for us. He loves us in such a deep and abiding love, more so than any other human being we'll ever know. You know, often a mother's love is exalted and lifted up, and they say nobody will ever love you like your mother, and certainly that's probably true for most people, although certainly there are exceptions to that rule as well. But Jesus' love is even far above that of a mother for a child. And it's amazing for us to think about. And so as we're thinking about that this morning, I want us to consider just how much our response to Him is appropriate. How deep should our love for Him be? And as we think about that, I want to start with bumper sticker religion. Any religion, any depth of spirituality is very difficult to put on a little bumper sticker slogan. But one that I saw a lot more, I haven't seen it as much lately. It used to be really popular, but it's kind of waned some, was this bumper sticker that said, "Jesus is my co-pilot." Perhaps you've seen it. I don't know, maybe you had it on your car. Maybe you still do. I don't know. I haven't looked at everybody's bumper stickers. But there was some pushback against this, of course. People would say, well, if Jesus is your co-pilot, you're in the wrong seat. You need to switch seats. He needs to be the pilot. But the fact of the matter is, we really do sometimes get our relationship with Jesus mixed up. Jesus doesn't want to just be part of our life, and we need to not try to make Him part of our life. He's a passenger in the car. He's the co-pilot. He's just along for the ride. These things are not appropriate ways for us to view our relationship with Jesus. Someone pushing back against the "Jesus is my co-pilot" bumper sticker said, if Jesus isn't the pilot, He's not on the plane. If He's not in charge, if He's not the one in control of the situation, He's not going to go along for the ride. And when comparing our lives to a flight, of course. Now, obviously, Jesus doesn't actually fly planes. So, if the pilot said, well, Jesus is going to pilot this, and I'm going to sit back and not do anything, probably wouldn't want to be on that plane either. But Jesus in our lives expects to be the pilot. He expects to be the one that guides it and directs it and controls it and flies our life in the direction that it needs to go. And if we don't go along with that, there are some problems in our lives that are going to arise. And Jesus is never going to take second place. God is never going to be in second place to anyone. That was one of the very first things that God taught the children of Israel. There is no other God beside me. It's me. There's nobody else over here on the side next to me. Nobody else compares to me. And so we need to remember that and think about that. So we need to rearrange our lives if we have not already. And I hope that we already have. I hope that this is just a lesson to remind us of how our lives are. But if there are changes that need to be made, we need to make them. Those of you in here, you can see this chart up on the screen. If not, for those in their cars, I'll describe it a little bit. We've got a wheel, basically. And in that wheel, there are spokes, just like a bicycle wheel would have, or even a car wheel would have some pieces that go from the center out to the rim. What's in the center? In the chart that we have here, Jesus is in the center, and that's the way it should be. Unfortunately, for some people, they have themselves in the center, and Jesus is just one of the spokes that goes out from their life in the center. Jesus is not okay with that. He doesn't want to be just a spoke coming out from your life. He wants to be your life. He doesn't want to be just a part of your life. And so here in this, we've got Jesus, and then around that, stemming out from Jesus being at the center of our life, you're going to have church and rules and of life and Christian service, and the Bible comes out, from that being the center, and the religious experience. And then you've got your work and your school and your home and entertainment and sex and recreation and everything else, and all the other things of your life flow out from that center. And how you interact with or don't interact with those various other things around the edges of your life are dependent on who's in the center. When self is in the center, we get all these other things all out of whack as well. But when Jesus is in the center, then the rest of that is going to naturally fall into place where it should. And so we need to be sure that he's in the center of our lives. As we think about that, we need to ask ourselves as we go through each and every day, where are you in the song, None of Self and All of Thee, or All of Self and None of Thee? It goes through the stages in that song. First, it's all of self and none of thee. And then it's, some of self and some of thee. And then it's, less of self and more of thee. And then finally, in the final verse, he gets to none of self and all of thee. Where are we? Where are you and I in that song? Which verse of that song are we living? Are we still in the some of me and some of you? Are we in the, a little less of me and a little more of you? Or are we ready to take that final step in that final verse and really say, self is gone? You notice in that, if you saw that chart there, when Jesus Christ is in the center of life, self isn't on the chart. Self isn't there at all. And in this chart as well that we have, it's kind of a sample of it with Christ in the middle. You got your work, you got your hobbies, you got your friends, your family, and it's all out there, but it all centers around Christ in the middle of your life. But when self is the center, then what? There are a lot of problems. And can you imagine one of these charts if you tried to divide that center circle in half and put Christ in one half and self in the other half? How that wouldn't work, would it? That's not going to accomplish anything. So we need to consider this as we move along. So again, I got into trouble one time when we had one church where I was preaching, and we had a church sign where you put the letters on and put little sayings up there and everything. We don't have one of those here, but we had one of those little signs. You'd put them. Well, one week I actually put this up there before for the week. Don't make Jesus part of your life. And oh boy, people got all kinds of upset about that. I know some of it was they didn't understand what I was saying, because it's kind of hard, again, with a bumper sticker type slogan to explain what that means. But I think some people got upset at it because they really were just making Jesus part of their life. He was just one chapter in their book. He wasn't the entire theme of their book. And that's a problem when we get to that point. Jesus doesn't want to be part of your life. And he makes that clear. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, He says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, if that's true of that situation, it's certainly true of any other. You can't serve God and self. You can't serve God and work. You can't serve God and family. You can't serve God and friend. You can't, whatever you want to put in there. And you must choose your master. Choose who's going to be in control of your life, or what's going to be in control of your life, and make that choice. And Jesus says, you can't serve two. It just doesn't work. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not room for any other person or any other things in our lives, that we have to be like monks up in a monastery locked away where all we do is pray all day and never do anything else. That wouldn't work either, really. That's never what God called us to. Jesus talks about us being the light of the earth, of the world, a city set on a hill. He talks about us being the salt of the earth. He tells us to go into the world, and he tells us, in his prayer to the Father, he says, they're going to be in the world, but pray that they're not of the world. And so we got to work. We got to have friends. We're going to have family, and money's pretty necessary to live in this world. It's hard to do without it. But those things can't be the master. They can't be the controlling influence over our lives. Jesus has to be that controlling influence. God has to be that controlling influence. And we need to remember that and consider that. In Matthew 22 and verses 37 and 38, a lawyer had come to Jesus trying to trick him, test him, and he asked him the question, what's the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus didn't even have to think about it. He already knew. Of course he knew. He wrote it, or at least, he was a part of it being written. Moses wrote it, of course, but he was part of the process of it being inspired. And so he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. That doesn't sound like Jesus says you need to make me part of your life, does it? Doesn't mean God's an important part of my life, even. No, not part. All. He repeats it 3 times in quoting that Old Testament passage from the law. All your heart, all your soul, all your mind. There's not much left for anybody else after that, is there? You talk about a depth of devotion. When we think about, Valentine's days and sweethearts and love and mushy stuff, and some people get disgusted by that around this time of year and can't stand it, and I understand. But when it comes to our love for God, it needs to be so complete and so total that nothing else, no one else can come in. There's not room. If we have filled our lives, our heart, soul, and mind so completely with our love for God, there's not room for anyone else to be loved like that. Now, what of course happens, the Bible tells us, when we have the love of God in our lives like that, that love overflows. And we love others not in place of God, but as God loves them. And we express His love in our lives, and it flows to everyone else. And that becomes a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing. But first, we've got to fill our lives with the love of God and the love of Christ. Galatians 2 and verse 20. Paul explains that the depth of his devotion to Christ. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Can we say that? mean, could we honestly say, and this is inspired scripture here, so Paul isn't lying, he's not even exaggerating, he's really saying, everything I'm doing in my life, it's not me, it's Jesus. Can we say that? Do we want to say that? Do we want to be able to say that? Or are we satisfied with just letting Jesus be a part of our life? Maybe an important part. Maybe we might even say the most important part. But are we really willing to go to that extent, like that song does, where it's none of self, where it's not me living anymore, it's Christ living in me? That's a step that's further than most people want to go. The great majority of people will never take that step. And for that reason, Jesus says that the way is narrow that leads to life. Because the way that leads to life is sacrifice of self, devotion to Christ, allowing Christ to be your all. We sing a song sometimes, He is my everything, He is my all. Is He? Is He really our everything? Or is He just part of our lives? He says then on the rest of verse 20, the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. He lets us know, I didn't just randomly pick somebody to be loved and devoted to. I chose Jesus because He loved me and He gave Himself for me. And that, again, back what Ashley talked about there in John 15:13 about Jesus, talking about a friend giving his life for his friend. And I have to talk to Ashley later about stealing my sermon illustrations and stuff before I use them. And that was, it's good when the entire worship focuses on this kind of a theme like this. It really does well. And also, he sang the song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. We'll talk about that one in a little bit. The second thing is, we talk about Jesus doesn't want to be part of your life. He also doesn't want part of your life. He wants it all. He's not going to accept, people talk a lot about a tithe when it comes to giving or something. They talk about giving a tithe when it comes to money. Sometimes people talk about tithing their time. They give a certain amount of time to God, to Jesus. But Jesus doesn't just want part. He wants all of it. He wants everything you do every day, all day, to be in service to Him. In Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23 says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, is going to enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Not the one who does some of the will, not the one who does it, one day out of the week or even 3 days out of the week, but the one who does it, the one who's doing the will. He says on that day there's going to be many that will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name? And we did all sorts of mighty works in your name. And He's going to say, I never even knew who you were. Get away from me. You are workers of lawlessness. Certainly, Luke chapter 14 and verses 26 through 33, Jesus makes it very clear just how much of us He wants. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? You mean, Jesus, I've got to choose between you and everyone else in my life? And I've got to hate them? But I thought we weren't supposed to hate. And certainly it's true that God does teach us not to hate. So we say, well, how does that work? How can I hate them and come to you, and yet you said don't hate? You said love. Part of it is probably to some degree a difference in the way we understand hatred and the way those in the first century would have understood hatred. They would have seen it as just as a choice between choosing one and rejecting the other. God says, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And yet, the Bible says that God is love. How could he have hated Esau? Well, he did not hate Esau in the sense that we think of where he wanted bad things to happen to Esau. He wanted Esau to suffer. But he chose Jacob. He chose Jacob to be his favorite, to be the one who was going to be the one through whom the Messiah came. And in that respect, because one was chosen, the other was rejected. The one that's chosen is seen as loved. The one that's rejected is seen as hated. We do that every day. We choose to eat one thing and reject something else. We choose to do one thing and not do something else. Of course, most of the time, if somebody said, well, you chose the steak over the fish, does that mean you hate fish? And some people say yes, but others would say, well, no, I wanted steak today. I was in the mood for steak. I love steak. I like fish too, but I wanted steak. And to some degree, that's the way we kind of think about it. You say, well, we choose whenever there's a choice. Sometimes, though, we might choose the fish instead of the steak. But when it comes to this situation with Christ, we can never choose the friend or the family or even ourselves over Christ. He must always be the choice, time and time again. And I can promise you this, if we really make those choices, if we always choose Christ over friends and family, I guarantee you the family members will think we hate them. Some of them will for sure. Now, those who are also serving Christ and choosing him as well will recognize what we're doing, and they will appreciate what we're doing. But there will be many in your lives who will say, well, you just hate me because you're always doing this instead of spending time with me or doing what I want you to do or whatever. They'll see it as hatred. He says, yes, even your own life. And whoever doesn't bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Just can't. There's just no two ways about it. You have to do this. Then he goes on about counting the cost. If you're going to build a tower, if you're going to go to war, you start to count. Can I afford this? Or do I have enough soldiers for this? These things were common concepts. And he says, so any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Renounce it all. Give it all up to Jesus. That's hard. That is a tough thing to ask of somebody. But remember, the one who's asking it isn't just somebody down the street. It isn't just the preacher or the elders in the church, or it's not mama or daddy asking you this even, the ones who gave you life and brought you into this world. It's not that. That's not who it is. It is the one who not only created everything, but also then gave up heaven to come to earth and die for you. So sometimes we might think, well, who do you think, how can you ask such extreme things of people? Because he was willing to do the extreme things for people. He gave so much already that what he's asking in return is actually a bargain price. He's given us so much more than what he's asking in return. Even though to us, we're like, well, but he's asking, he wants everything. He wants me to give up everything. Yes. And that's a small price to pay for what he's offered for you. We sing the song sometimes, all to Jesus I surrender. But do we really? Have we really? Have we really surrendered all to him? Or are we still trying to keep a few things on the side? It's kind of like, you imagine the young man or young lady who goes to get married. And they say, oh, yeah, I'll be devoted to you. You'll be my spouse. I'll love you, but I'm going to keep this other love on the side. How's that going to turn out? The answer is going to be no. No, if you're not going to devote yourself completely to me, then this marriage is not going to happen. We're not getting married with the idea that you're going to keep somebody else on the side. And yet, how many people think that they can become Christians and yet not surrender all to Jesus, just the things that I want him to have, and I'll hang on to the others on the side? And do we really think Jesus is going to be okay with that? He's not going to be okay with that. No more than that fiance is going to be okay with the idea that we're going to get married, but I'm going to keep somebody on the side. That's just, anyone who is okay with that has got issues, because that's not okay. And everyone should understand that's not okay. We need to be surrendering all to Jesus. Unfortunately, in America today, and really in other places in the world as well, probably, our religious behavior, if you will, our religious devotion, if you could even call it devotion with some people, kind of falls into what it would be called dilettantism. Now, we've probably all heard of the dilettante. She's the dilettante of the ball, and she's coming out and all this, having a great party and, whatever. And we think of that sometimes, but the actual definition of dilettantism is a person who practices or takes up activities merely for their own amusement. Now think about that for a minute, and think about how many people, perhaps people you know, I hope not any of you, but I'm sure there are people you know who take up Christianity for their own amusement. That doesn't work. There are a lot of things that we could take up for amusement. Golf, bowling, fishing, maybe even shopping, race car driving, horseback riding. There's a lot of things out there that people take up for their amusement. But Christianity is not one of them. Jesus will never accept people taking up the worship and service of him as a way to entertain or amuse themselves. That's not what it's about. As we consider the direction our nation is going, perhaps the harshness and those turning away from Christianity will actually help us to realize just how much Christianity should be the central part of our lives, how much Christ should be in our heart of hearts. Because it's not something just to do on the weekends. It's not someplace just to go to have friends and have a good time. Worshiping Christ is about truly turning everything, surrendering all to Him. As we read, for example, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 3 through 11, and Jesus talks about people hating you and people persecuting you, that doesn't sound like amusement, does it? That doesn't sound like recreation. That sounds very serious. And when we say that we should take Christianity seriously and that we should take Christ seriously, that doesn't mean that we're going to be walking around like we were baptized in vinegar and weaned on a pickle all the time and bitter and angry and just harsh all the time. We can still have an enjoyment of life. In fact, the amazing thing to me is we read the scriptures and we see the apostles, after they'd been beaten because they were teaching others about Jesus, they left rejoicing, which I've never been there, but I don't know how you do that. That's hard. How do you rejoice after you've just been beaten for doing something? And yet they rejoiced that they were worthy to suffer. But Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. That life, that abundant life, isn't just heaven. He does want us to have eternal life with Him, but even on this earth, He wants us to have an abundant life. It's just that that abundant life doesn't mean pleasing self, because self is supposed to be out of the picture. But it will be an abundant life. It's not about our amusement. As we come toward the end here, I just want us to realize our relationship with Jesus is to be like no other. Ashley talked about that passage in John 15, 13, and 14. And we sang the song at the beginning, what a friend we have in Jesus. And He is a friend like, how many of your friends do you know who would die for you? How many of your friends would you die for? Probably not a lot. But Jesus did, and He calls on us to lay down our lives for Him if necessary, but more importantly, to live our lives day after day for Him. But while He is our friend, and oh, what a friend He is, no greater love, no greater friend than that would do that. But He's not just a friend. Even if you had a friend who saved your life, would you feel like you had to do every single thing that friend told you to do for the rest of your life? I think probably not. I would appreciate that they saved my life. I would feel indebted to them in some way, but I wouldn't feel like they had then the authority or the right to just tell me everything I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life after that. Would you? And yet that's what Jesus said. He said, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. Now see, that's not a normal friendship relationship. In fact, if one of our human friends started trying to control us like that and tell us everything, you got to do everything I tell you to do, our other friends and our family and other people, including, therapists and psychiatrists, would be telling us, this is not a healthy relationship. You can't let another person rule your life like that. But it's Jesus. He created us. He died for us. He recreated us, restored us, resurrected us, in a sense, through baptism into a new life. And He, as God, does have the right to tell us how it will be. But no, our relationship with Jesus is certainly a unique one. We wouldn't allow any other friend to do that. We wouldn't allow anyone, even a spouse or even a parent. We see the harm even with parents when they try to be so controlling and so exclusive that you can't love anybody else. Now, obviously in the marriage relationship and sexually speaking, that is an exclusive relationship. But, we worry very much if a husband, is the way it usually is, but a wife either, would say to their spouse, well, you can't have any friends. I'm your own, you're devoted to me and you can't have another friend. You can't, stay away from your family. You got to reject your family and choose me. We see that as a very harmful relationship, don't we? And yet we saw just a while ago that's exactly what Jesus called. No, he doesn't tell us, never talk to your family. That's not what he's saying. In fact, he wants us to reach our family for him as well. But we've got to understand our relationship with Jesus is unique. And of course, a lot of that is because of who he is. So we need to ask ourselves the questions. Are you trying to just make Jesus a part of your life? Or are you becoming part of his? Are you trying to give Jesus the parts of your life that you won't miss? Or are you giving him all like he did for you? You may need to make some changes in your relationship with Jesus. Maybe you didn't have the relationship you thought you did. As we sing the invitation song this morning, consider your relationship with him and consider whether it is all that it ought to be. Have you really surrendered all? Is it none of self and all of thee? Or are you holding back on him? Are you holding out? He's given all for you. Won't you do everything you can to give all for him in the coming days and weeks? Let's consider that. And if you have a need, let it be known as we stand and sing.